No matter whether you are going into summer 2021 with your staff vaccinated or not, campers won't be vaccinated yet, continuing the need for pods, bubbles, and cohorts. Staff training this year will likely look a bit more segmented than it has in the past, and the days of everyone crowding into the dining hall and having discussions and listening to lectures are over. On today's episode, we discuss some of our ideas for how to best train your staff while operating in pods, bubbles, and cohorts.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if your registration software gave you more time? With UltraCamp, you can track attendance, manage staff applications, streamline registration, and much more. Get back the time you need to focus on what is really important. Camp. Find out more at summercampsoftware.com/camp code.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their campers, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine, and we need to help each other bring our very best. And before we get started with our topic, let's do some introductions. Beth, will you start us off?
Absolutely. I'm Beth Allison, co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. I was camp director for 15 years and am now a camp consultant. And my focus is intentional leadership training.
And Gabrielle.
And my name is Gabrielle Rail. I am one of the directors of Camp Oro. Camp Oro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada, and we focus on creating a positive community for young women and girls. And we do that while speaking in French and in English.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm Ruby Compton. I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors. I work as a friend and supporter of camp throughout Western North Carolina, specifically where I live, but also all across the world. And I also play a lot outside. So if you have not, if you're not checking out the YouTube video, if you're just listening, this may be one you want to tune into if you want to see a very gnarly black eye that I'm sporting right now from a face meets rock incident that might have happened while I was kayaking the other day. So if you want to check that out or follow along with my challenge of trying to match the color of my eye to my outfit, I think I'm winning today. I'm just saying, I think it's pretty good.
Very much so.
You're definitely winning.
It's a deep burgundy.
Well, today's topic is training in pods and bubbles. And we want to go ahead and just jump right in. We know that staff training is going to look a little different this summer, and that pods and bubbles and cohorts may be something you're considering. So, Beth, what ideas do you have to kick us off today on how we can do training well in pods and bubbles?
So I have an acronym for you. I have not done one in many episodes. I mean, since the acronym episode. So I'm due. And of course, the acronym for today is POD. So my P stands for prepare. This is new. It will be strange, difficult for many, hard not to naturally do what we've always done at camp, especially if we have returning staff. So it's going to take a bit of getting used to. And of course, the best way to prepare is to front load your staff. Why will there be pods? What's the reasoning behind them? How will they work? How might you be feeling about this? How can we make this not only work, but also be fun and enjoyable? So to get them into the right headspace, we just want to make sure that we're front loading before they arrive at camp by asking for their input. What concerns you about living in a bubble this summer? What excites you? What do we need to be aware of, sensitive to? How can we make the most of what we hope is a unique summer? So help your staff to connect with their summer pod ahead of time. You can send them Bonjoro videos. You can have them send them to one another before camp starts by getting each person to send one Bonjoro to each of their fellow bubbleettes and front load them on how to send something thoughtful and meaningful, and then let them get creative with it. You can give them a deadline and check in periodically to see how it's going. It's a great personal way to connect and build relationships, and it makes people feel welcome and noticed. Or you could send all your staff stamped and self-addressed postcards for each member of the bubble and have them send them out. Again, front load the reasons why, give them a bit of guidance on what you're looking for, and then encourage them to add their own flair. Just think of the excitement of your staff when they begin receiving postcards in the mail from old friends or just ones they haven't made yet. And then once they arrive at camp, you need to have your staff exist in this unit style program inside their own bubble and allow time in your training schedule for them to go through those stages of building and managing this smaller group. You got to give them time to practice and ask questions and try things out and possibly fail. And of course, try again. It's going to be new to all of us. So we will need staff's help and their feedback and their guidance in making it work. So you want to make sure to build in time for this during training this year. The other thing is that if you can't be together in one space at camp, what can you do to have them share and be together? What sorts of things can you create and add in, like pen pals, and allow them to write to one another through the day? Can you do group projects where they each have an opportunity to write in a book that you leave for everyone to look at in the dining hall or in your staff lounge? So the more that we prepare them for what bubbles or pods may look like and feel like, and then the more input we get from our staff to how this can work best for everyone, the better off our summer will be. So start by preparing them.
Excellent. So what you're saying is to front load? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it might work.
Awesome. Gabrielle, what are your first thoughts on this question?
My first thoughts is that our staff are going to be very nervous that their best friend is going to be in a different pod and or bubble, and that's going to be one of the major anxieties that are going to be weighing on our staff's minds. And I'm thinking about the people that I lean on during the summer, and I'm thinking about how what that would look like if I wasn't able to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody that I know I trust and can help me through tough times. And for me, that's the biggest concern that I have is that piece. And I think that with all of the wonderful things that Beth said, I would include some of those deeper conversations with your leadership team members, and I would include those conversations and be transparent with your staff members that this is a thing that we understand might be tough, and to try to come up with solutions together on how to have those conversations, how you can have perhaps quote unquote some alone time with a best friend if needed, while social distancing. And to be honest, that's something I haven't completely figured out. That's something that I'm in conversation with right now with my leadership team members. And I do believe in obviously Beth and Ruby also believe that being transparent and front load from the beginning before people arrive, that's going to be key. And bringing your staff in on that conversation via a town hall or some one-on-ones with the leadership team members, I think that's going to be very, very helpful with that transition to pods and bubbles. The summer is going to be a tough summer. It's going to be a not your typical summer, and support for our staff members, this has to be a top priority. And there's some real roadblocks when it comes to being in a pod or a bubble when it comes to that personal individual support that staff members need. So one, acknowledging that this will be tough and saying it will be, and two, saying we're here to problem solve that piece, and that their friendships are important to you. And, I know that I like to say that our camp is camper first, and I really believe that it is. And I really believe that my staff believe that. But for it to be camper first, they need to have that support system and that network. And so I know I say this so much, but I really truly believe chatting with your inner circle first, and problem solving on how you can approach your staff members to talk about these difficult things will be helpful when moving into the summer.
Gabs, I love that you brought up that point about when we start talking about cohorts. Absolutely, staff are looking around and going like, "Is my friend going to be in the cohort? Am I going to be able to talk to them? But what if we're all vaccinated? Can I hang out with them then?" We're going to have to address questions like that. I think it's smart to go ahead and ask. We typically would, when we were doing counselor pairings and figuring out time off groups, we would typically ask staff like, "Who would you like to have in your time off groups?" And so I would ask that question. I would ask it prior to camp starting. I would say that the pod that you have during training may be a different pod from who you're working with throughout the summer, depending on if that's your like quarantine pod, and then things open up once everybody's been there for a couple weeks. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like I felt like when I told my staff that when we make counselor pairings, we try to make them for the whole summer. So this is not just a like, if something's going on, just like suck it up and kind of get through the next couple of weeks because it'll change in a couple of weeks. No, solve it, fix it, talk to them. Like you need to deal with it. And I think that provided some impetus for folks to address issues that came up because we told them this is long term. This is the group you're going to be with. You need to be able to sort through stuff. And if you're having trouble, we're here to help. But you need to think about it like we can't just avoid problems and let them simmer till they blow up. That's not going to work this summer. What you said, Gabs, too, makes me wonder, like, are cliques going to be worse this summer? Is that something, or cliques, as our Canadian friends say? Sounds so fancy. But I wonder if because we're having to draw some deeper, stronger segments of our staff, I think that's a question we ask. And again, we're in this kind of new world of managing staff where there's some new questions that we maybe haven't had to really ask this way in the past. So 100%, let's get our staff in on that conversation and say things like, I would say this as the director to my staff, I am concerned that cliques are going to be worse this year. What ideas do you have for how we can stay in our pods and bubbles and cohorts and minimize risk? And how we can also make sure that everyone feels like they're included and they have a support network, which is so important. I also think this is where talking about kind of that dimmer switch of risk mitigation, right? That I read an article recently that it was like, if we have to be so aggressively trying to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, that people get tired of that. And so we need to make sure it's really clear for our staff, what are the things they're expected to do where, and where are we, most aggressive about trying to reduce the spread, and where can you relax a little bit, and making that abundantly clear. And I want to give a shout out to Jackie Kalin, who is in our designing staff training class. She made an image that she's going to have around camp that says "do to," and so it has a picture of wearing a mask, being outdoors, or being 6 feet away from each other, at least 6 feet away from each other. And so the message is you always need to be doing at least 2 of these when you are with folks that are outside of your pod. And it's like, it makes so much sense if we can create some simple messaging around it to make it really clear, because that's something that our governments and our public health officials and everybody has struggled with from the get-go of the pandemic, is communicating really clearly what we need to do. I see Beth nodding. It makes me think she's probably going to dive into this a little bit more. So any way that we can simplify, in your pods, you can do this. Out of your pods, you can do this. You can still have a conversation with your best friend in another pod, but you will need to be masked. If you don't want to be masked, then you need to be outdoors and you need to be sitting at least 6 feet apart. And just make it abundantly clear, this is what needs to be done.
Yes, so prepare.
Yeah, so
lots of preparation.
It all comes down to preparation.
A lot on the front load end. And I think I was aggressively nodding mostly at government's lack of consistent messaging. And we've had this conversation before, which could be a podcast all unto itself, but if camp people had been able to take charge of this in the beginning. But yes, is really thinking through stuff clearly. And as Gab said, involving staff to come up with, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? Better to talk about that before the what ifs happen, or when this happens, maybe, instead of what if.
Excellent. All right, my friends, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hey, Beth, I have a question for you. When you were a camp director, who did you spend the most time with during the summer?
Who did I spend the most time with? My staff, of course,
Mhm.
working with them, training them, helping them to problem solve, learning from them, and obviously the campers, teaching, playing, singing, dancing, discovering, hanging out.
Awesome. Yeah, none of that sounds like you got into camping to spend hours hanging out and talking to your camp's database and registration software. Would you say that that's true?
Absolutely true.
Sometimes all the busy work and button clicking associated with running camp keeps us from getting to do the things that we love. That's why I encourage you to get to know my friends at Ultra Camp. Ultra Camp helps you get back to spending time remembering why you love working at camp. How do they do this? Ultra Camp gives you powerful tools integrated into your registration software. And with Ultra Camp, you get automated billing, simple online registration for customers, a staffing module for hiring, which includes integrated background checks, and communication with customers and donors and tracking those communications. If you think all this sounds too good to be true, friends, it is real. Visit summercampsoftware.com/campcode. And right now, Ultra Camp is offering free setup for a limited time exclusively to Camp Code listeners. My friends at Ultra Camp would love to show you a future where you finally have the time to get back to what's really important, running camp. Visit their website, summercampsoftware.com/campcode, and set up a time to chat. All right, and we are back and talking today about pods and bubbles and how we effectively train when we may need to be in cohorts this summer. So Beth, you started us off with prepare. What is the next letter of your acronym?
So O is for over communicate. So like any new changes at camp, we need to communicate them in as many places as possible. In emails, in Instagram posts, on Facebook, Twitter, Marco Polos, Bonjoros, whatever avenues we use, we need to use them all. You can host a town hall night for staff and then a separate one for campers to explain how pods will work, what will they look like, why they're important, and hopefully the fact that we'll only have to run camp this way for one summer. So let's make it memorable and exciting and magic. You could even get staff to record short videos talking about their excitement for pods or bubbles. You could do a whole week where staff are creating posts just with cool photos of bubbles before you even announce to campers that this is how the summer will work. And I mean the actual bubbles that you blow. Remember, when you don't have the ability to have everyone all together in one space this summer, you need to figure out ways to communicate what will happen in the day, any changes to protocols or procedures or any news that you have. So figure out all the ways that you can communicate to staff throughout the summer. Is there a Google Doc brief that staff need to read at the end of every day or every morning before they come to camp? Is there a Blackboard or a whiteboard where messages can be daily posted? Can you create a camp radio station to do fun wake ups and disperse much needed information? Can you put out a camp newspaper each morning and put one on every cabin's in front of their door for when they wake up? And by newspaper, I mean like one short page. Can you have everyone in each pod have walkie-talkies? Not everyone, but one person in each pod have walkie-talkies so that you can communicate that way. Can you have a bub club meeting daily with one member of each pod, socially distanced and wearing masks, of course, and then have this person be responsible for relaying all the information? Just think of all the ways that you can be more communicative and do it really effectively. Can each bubble record a 2-minute video wrap up of their day at leadership training, and you can share them all the next morning while people eat breakfast? What can you do to ensure folks are still communicating with one another and that you are over communicating with your staff and your parents, of course, but your staff while you're there at camp so that they never feel left out or like they didn't know something important? So over communicate.
That's one of my favorite words of all time. Any staff member that's ever worked for me knows that is something I asked from my staff all the time, because when we strive to over communicate, then we might actually achieve the amount of communication we need to head off a lot of problems. So I love that you brought that up. Gabrielle, what other ideas do you have?
For me, I think, like we said, perhaps it's possible that this summer is the only summer that it's going to be quote unquote this way, that we might be able to get back to how our summers were before. And what opportunities do we have in these bubbles that we wouldn't have been able to experience in other summers? I was toying with the idea when we're relooking at our schedule, and I was looking at what kind of activities could our pods do together, and what kind of opportunities does that lead to. And so we have a couple of islands on the lake that we live on, and there was one island that's particularly far. It's not too far, but for young individuals, young campers, it is. And so they always get to go to the closer island, which basically you can yell from the camp shore and say, "We need more hot dogs," and somebody can hop in a canoe and just pop it over. And so I was thinking, what if our younger campers got to go to that further island, that got to spend a day on that island that they would never have been able to do unless they were older. And that opened up an opportunity for another pod to do a theme blast in that section of that group, not going into their cabins or anything, but decorating the outside in that area and making it a wonderland of sorts. So when that group comes back, they see all of these wonderful signs, maybe props, perhaps there's interactive games that can be played, and that pod can be at a distance, seeing their faces when they came back from their trip on the island, and that sort of magical space. I want to help our staff members look beyond the fact that, though it is restrictive, and we do need to, of course, acknowledge the difficulties that we're going to be experiencing this summer, and we have to validate that. But there's also hidden nuggets of magic, if you will. And I use that term very loosely when I use camp magic at camp. Camp magic for me is intentional planning, but that we're able to find some of these wonderful nuggets in these spaces where we would never really be able to do that. So I would help my staff brainstorm and dream. What are some of the things that we can do that is just surprising, that we would have never been able to do before? And I think encouraging bending the rules in a positive way, where it does create connections, is going to be part of that summer experience, where it's going to be unique than all the others. We already know that, but let's not just make it unique in the way there was restrictions, but there's also opportunities.
I love it. I think when I think about opportunities this summer, I think if we're going to operate in pods, I think your pods should have podcasts. And if it were me, because I'm a podcast nerd, I would use podcasts during training. So I would consider divvying up some of the curriculum. And maybe this is more like teaching techniques, and best practices for putting campers to bed at night, or best practices for meal times at camp, right? So think about some of those things that it's not so critical that like these specific pieces of information get shared. Or maybe if it is that, you hand them each pod a piece of paper and say, your goal is to communicate this information, but as interestingly as possible. And they can use a smartphone. You could get real old school and go find some tape recorders and introduce folks to some of the best technology, in my opinion. Just don't get it near any magnets or anything like that. But have them create podcasts and training podcasts for one another. And these don't have to be long, drawn out things. They can be a 5 to 10 minute recording. And here, pod A is talking about best practices when you're transitioning from one activity to another. And pod B is talking about how to engage that camper that's sitting out on the sidelines. And pod C is talking about little things they do throughout the day to make their day better. And pod D is talking about time off, right? And just giving them a little time to plan that. And I think you'll see a ton of creativity come out of it. And then they're hearing this information from peers too. And potentially it gives you and your leadership team the opportunity to preview what is being said. In the past, we have had peer leaders that teach to our staff. Many folks have used that model before, but we don't always know the exact words that are being said. And now we actually have a way to monitor that that's not so wild and doesn't feel so much like we are spying on everything that they're saying and double checking them. So I would consider, how could you use podcasts during training? And again, like how cool that your staff at the end into the summer can say, I helped create a camp podcast or a training podcast. Also, now you have this library of resources that you can use in the future in training future staff, because some of these skills are going to carry over year to year to year to year. So if it's me and I'm running training this year, I'm doing podcasting. That's just all there is to it. All right. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
I was gonna say, I love that idea. It's fantastic.
I really do as well. And as we know, teaching is obviously is one of the highest way of learning. And this is something that would have been really more complicated 15 years ago, but with our phones, and it's so much more accessible today. I love that. I just love it.
Awesome. All right, Beth, I think it's time for you to finish out this acronym for us.
So D is for delight. And I think that Gab already touched on that in some of the things that she was talking about before. So name your bubbles or your bubbleettes, your bubble participants. You can steal that one if you like, or come up with your own. But giving them fun and creative names will help them be more excited for them and not just dread them. You could do a session about the origin of bubbles. Did you know Pears Soap created a famous advertising campaign in 1886 using a painting by John Everett Millais, and it's called A Child Playing with Bubbles. And the title of that painting is why we call them bubbles and not soap spheres or something. The Chicago company Chemtoy began selling bubbles in the solution in 1940, and it's been popular with all of us ever since. You could play with bubbles, big ones, small ones, all sizes, of course, inside your own pod, because there will be blowing involved or wind involved. You can do some science play at leadership training. A bubble consists of 3 layers, 2 layers of soap clinging to either side of a layer of water. What might the soap represent? How about the water? Light that hits the different layers interferes with itself and causes that colorful iridescence that we can see. So a bubble always also attempts to form a sphere because of surface tension pulling the liquid inward. So you can use that to talk about the importance of circles and community. And what could the surface tension represent? Think about all those kinds of things. When you make bubbles in the sun or in a place that's very dry, they evaporate really quickly. If a bubble touches a dry finger, it pops because of the water molecules that are attracted to your dry skin. So this could be a great metaphor for COVID bubbles at camp. They're delicate. When they're intact, they're filled with light and beautiful colors, but we have to be careful with them so that they don't pop. The surface of water is made up of hundreds of molecules that stick tightly together to each other because of intermolecular forces. And again, that surface tension. So this helps the water molecules to retain their shape and stay closely knitted to one another. So play with that metaphor. Hundreds of molecules that stick together and stay closely knit to one another to retain their shape. There's some good stuff there. You could paint with bubbles. Each pod could make their own bubble banner. You could have a bubble wand relay race. You could have a photo contest with bubbles and see the amazing creations that each pod could come up with. You could have pods figure out how to make the biggest bubbles using materials that you already have at camp. And don't miss the opportunity to take photos of all of these activities during staff training and get them out there for your campers to see, like I talked about under prepare. You could try to fit the most people inside a single bubble, but of course, staying within your actual pods. Did you know that in March 2007, Sam Heath, who is Sam the Bubble Man, made a Guinness World Record when he enclosed 19 people inside a single giant bubble in Surrey, UK. So see what your staff can do to break that record. Of course, they have to only participate with the people in their pods. So if they don't have pods of 19, maybe you can create your own records. You could create peas in a pod necklaces that are made out of salt and flour and put the little, the names of the people in your pod on the little peas. Just look up bubble activities on Pinterest, and I swear you will have ideas for days. All I'm trying to say is what Gab has said earlier, we need to embrace the idea, get behind it, find some excitement for it. And like other necessary things that camps have to do, we put our spin on it and we make it fun. So brainstorm with your staff during virtual training before you even get to camp, all the ways that you can play together and feel part of a larger group while still being in bubbles throughout the summer. And again, having them participate in those ideas will get them more excited for them. So generate your list and be sure to do at least one great idea each week. For example, you could pair the bubbles up in the summer and have each bubble spend a whole day doing random acts of kindness for another bubble and keep it a secret. You could have pods collect points throughout the week for best practices or trying out new challenges together or doing something to celebrate joy. You could get bubble bracelets made with pod names, or you could do necklaces or bandanas, helping kids and staff to focus on building their team and being a part of something special rather than on what they might be missing. By being able to travel all over camp wherever they like will help make the summer go more smoothly. So figure out all the ways that you can make this special. Perhaps you want to develop a pod patrol or a bubble brigade or staff whose job it is to make pods fun and something that kids will look forward to. Whatever you do, we want to make sure that we do all we can to delight them with this summer.
My brain hurts from all those ideas. There's like,
no kidding.
I don't need to ask my staff. I'm just going to ask Beth.
I was like, Beth, you can recap this show, okay? I passed the baton.
I can never take away from you, Gab. Never, never. I just had some fun thinking about all the things you could do with bubbles.
Oh my gosh. One of my favorite classes of all time to teach when I taught outdoor ed was our bubbles class. And, you know, sometimes it was a little bit of a hard sell, but man, once you were out there playing with the bubbles and making the giant ones, like, kids love it. I loved it. And the science is great too. And you hit on so many great ones. So I think that's a great idea. And it's clean. Oh my gosh. You put your hands in soap and glycerin. Like that's what bubble solution is. So yeah, don't blow them in each other's faces, but like, it seems like a pretty low risk activity. All right.
Beth, I can't believe you forgot to say clean in your, I am shocked that there was one more thing that we could squeeze into the bubble.
Oh, well, all right. Well, Gabrielle, what you got to follow that up?
Well, actually, I have one thing to follow that up. Everything that we're doing this summer, I would say make it a point to share it outward with our families, with our alumni, and with the educational industry, other camps. We need to celebrate how we are creating connections at camp. Not just to ourselves, but outwardly. And we could even, create a time capsule for future, future camp people to find and celebrate. It's coming together like this takes bravery. Coming together like this it's taking a risk. It takes trust. This is no small feat. And I would have a dedicated team that would create mini projects that they would be representing online, that they would be representing in interviews. I would have people, get each pod to celebrate some of the small things that they've done and share that with everybody else. And not just the things that they're proud of, but also some tips and tricks. I really, really believe after this year that camps can't be quiet with the innovation that we do. And I think that we have so much on our plate that it's very difficult to market the great stuff that we do. But 9 times out of 10, when I speak to camp directors, what they respond to me is what they say is, well, I was just doing my job. This is just what we do. And the truth is that people don't know what we do. And I think in this particular case, the education system can learn so much from us. And I'm not speaking to teachers. I think they're doing amazing, but the people that are in charge of funding those schools that see that you need to put time and intentionality into what we do so that we're creating positive results. And I know that camps are struggling financially. I know that we're struggling to get staff, but this is also an advertisement for other funds to come towards us and to encourage staff members to come back to camp in the sense of we're problem solvers, we get stuff done, and our results have a lifetime of an impact, a positive impact. So I would dedicate some time and team members this summer to celebrating what we do, not just on camp, but outside of camp.
Awesome. It's so smart. And I think, yeah, innovation. That is the theme of the camp industry right now. And I'm so excited to hear the stories on the other end of the summer for what folks have come up with and what they've done. My last tip that I'll throw out there is, I think during training, you want to make sure that you're running simulated positive cases. So what does it look like if there's somebody in a pod that has a positive case? And I think one way you do this is like everybody has to ramp up precautions, but I wonder about actually running it during training where it's pod by pod or a couple pods by a couple pods. Because here's something I'm worried about happening this summer is, let's say there is a positive case in a pod, and then all of a sudden, those kids are wearing and those staff are wearing masks all the time, and they're kind of separated from everybody else and kind of alienated. And so like what cues or triggers and like visual cues are we creating that is then going to cue to everybody else in camp, oh, well, they had a positive case. And I'm worried about that. And so I wonder about encouraging the practice of like wearing a mask just because, and not necessarily wearing it because you had an exposure or you went home over the weekend, but that maybe on Wednesdays, Pod B always wears masks, because it's still going to be a skill we're going to need going into this school year. So let's continue to practice these extra mitigation skills. Let's simulate during training, but also maybe you just say like on Tuesdays, our cabin or our pod, like we take these extra precautions because every Tuesday, that's what we do. And I think that it may seem and feel kind of funny, but I think it'll help so that when a staff member walks in the dining hall wearing a mask who wasn't wearing one yesterday, there's not this like, oh my gosh, are they sick? Do they have COVID? Do they have an exposure? What's going on? Because I don't think that's what we want the story of the summer to be. And it's going to be really easy for the story of the summer to be, oh, well, they had a COVID case and they had a COVID case and they had a COVID case. And I think if we can create some ways to take away some of those visual cues, and you just wear a mask because you wear a mask, or you wear a mask because like, look at my cool outfit and how it matches my black eye, or whatever, whatever you can find. But I want to encourage camps to think about, yes, we need to use the mitigation strategies and go up and down the dimmer switch as we need it. But also I think we need to be playful, cautiously playful, but playful with some of it, and let it just be a part of our culture that sometimes we wear masks because it's fun, and that will make it less scary as kids go back into the world and see people wearing masks. Because I've heard this plenty of times, people are like, man, flu and cold season, I'm going to totally wear a mask all the time. I didn't get sick at all this year. It's awesome. Right. And we could all use, not having the stomach bug go around camp, 2-3 weeks into camp. So like, maybe we ramp up some of those mitigation strategies. And again, it's not always about COVID necessarily. So that's my last tip for today. Anything else to add from anybody before we go to our recap?
I love that.
No, I think I'm idea'd out.
I don't believe you. I bet if we just dug a little more, we could find some more, but we'll save it for the next episode. Gabrielle, time for your recap.
Yay! Okay. All right. So it is a shocker to hear that the primary energy where we need to communicate with our staff members is before staff training, before they arrive onto camp. It is a shocker that front loading is about 80% of what we talked about today, but this is lessening the gap between expectations and reality. So here we go. Why don't we start with Beth in her POD acronym of prepare, over communicate, and delight. Let's talk to our staff. Let's use as many different ways of doing it, such as buongiorno, postcards, why we need to have bubbles, time to practice, group projects. And while we're at it, Gab is saying, hey, why don't we also just ask our staff, what are you most afraid of? I'm most afraid of the fact that your friendships are going to be very strained. And how do we solve this? And let's do this together and let's come up with a system. At the same time, when we're talking about over communicate really actually translates into making people trust each other. That is what over communicate is. And we need to do that before, and we also have to do that during. During, you can do things such as Google Docs, a Blackboard, any which way, use the visual, use the audio, use the, social distance in person, but we must communicate. And when we're talking about communications, let's go over to Ruby and where she's talking about keeping it simple, such as we want you to do two things: wear a mask, distance, or be outdoors. And let's always try to do these two things. Communication paired with simplicity lowers our anxiety and helps with team management. Now we're on the final part of our acronym, DELIGHT. Well, Gab's talked a little bit about delight. I don't know, I'm talking about myself in the third person, but we're going with it. And create camp magic. These are opportunities that we're not possibly going to have in other summers. So let's embrace that, and let's our staff members understand that, yes, being safe is important, but also embracing the difference is super important. And there is so many acronyms that you can use, not acronyms, but metaphors that you can use with bubbles. I had no idea until today. Apparently Pinterest is an amazing resource for that. Go and check it out. And also perhaps rewind this podcast to hear all of the list that Beth said. I am not going to go over those things. And then lastly, one of my pieces that I love that Ruby talked about, which was pods equal podcasts, and get your staff members to record that, and also have your staff members and campers practice what it's like if they have a positive case within their group. What does that look like? What does that sound like? And I love the idea. Never thought of it before, that perhaps in the future we will be wearing masks to just lessen those colds, the flu, whatever we have at camp, and we can normalize wearing masks. And that's the type of generation we want to raise, is the generation that is responsible and respectful, not just for themselves, but for the people around them.
Well done. And play with bubbles more. I think that's that's my take home.
I am jumping on Pinterest right now, and I'm sending my staff being like, okay, next meeting we have, everybody come with a bubble game. The metaphors were really good too, Beth, though.
Yeah,
that science part, my goodness, I am definitely re-listening.
Yeah, I love it. Well, friends, we'd love for you to get involved with the Camp Code podcast. You can tell us your thoughts on this episode by using #CampCode. You can also tell us what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests that you'd recommend we have on the show, any great leadership training tips that you have to share. We'd love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. Also, if you have found this podcast to be useful, please leave us a rating and review in your podcasting app of choice. Your feedback really helps keep the show going, and we love our reviewers so much that sometimes we even share highlights here. And so Beth has a review to share with us today.
I do. I'm so excited. So today we have a review to read from a listener whose username is H. Grissom, who says, as a young female resident camp director, it can be a very lonely place to be. When you listen to these ladies, you feel like you're right at home. So many takeaways from every single episode. It's the professional development that I definitely need and look forward to.
H. Grissom, we appreciate you. Send me an email at ruby@gocamp.pro, and I've got a gift to share your way. So send me an email. I'd love to connect with you. Speaking of connecting with us, let's each go around, share a little bit about how you can be in touch with us if you have questions or want to follow up after this episode. Beth, where can folks find you?
They can email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro. I'm on Twitter as @Topaz, and on Instagram, Topaz_Faye, F-A-E.
Thank you. Gabrielle?
You can check out where I work at waro.com, OUAREAU. You can contact me at info@waro.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail, and Rail takes 2 L's.
Beautiful. And you can email me, ruby@rubyoutdoors.com. You can also find me on Instagram at rubyoutdoors, as well as on Twitter at rubylyn85. Beth, you want to share what our next podcast is going to be?
Yes, 9 more quick fire videos that you can use in staff training this year.
I love those episodes so much. Excited to share. Our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training, and we would love to hear some of your memorable moments or most effective tips. You can tell us what they are using that hashtag camp code. This week's best practice comes from Beth.
So, how about creating a bubble book or a pod publication? So, at the end of each week, you could have your pods or your bubbles summarize everything they've learned and accomplished and ask them to share their favorite stories and moments from the week. And this could be done in writing or through video. And if you're creating a yearbook rather than a video as essay, then you obviously want to include some photos as well. But looking back on what you've accomplished is a great way for staff and campers to feel pride in what they've done. And this project can allow campers and staff to know what went on in other bubbles throughout the session. You could give each pod their own page or pages in your bubble book. If you want to create a format similar to traditional yearbooks, you could have spreads for various activities and sports and group photos. You could create a video essay in much the same way, allowing each bubble to contribute something. Develop an outline so that folks are offering you some sort of similar concepts on a theme or answering the same kinds of questions. You could have each pod do its own family portrait and get super creative with costumes and props. These memories are unique and worth remembering, and offering staff and campers a way to hold on to these memories for future generations to see what you all accomplished in your bubbles in the summer of 2021 will be a great source of pride and a lasting piece of your camp's history. Being a part of something like this that's so special will also help folks to be more excited about spending the summer in a bubble, and that is half your battle.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Beth. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in today. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all of our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Stay tuned for our next episode. And from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for listening, friends.